We're back. We're mushing the NBA Draft, second installment. The first time we did the top 3 picks, Chet, Paolo, and Jabari. And this time, we're going into the guards. I think I have 4 guards here that I like to varying degrees that I think will go in the top probably half of the draft, at least top 20 picks. I'd be really surprised if any of them fell further. There are other guards in the draft, but these are the 4 most interesting that I had my eyes on. And that's going to be Jaden Ivy from Purdue, Bennedict Mathurin from Arizona, Johnny Davis, Wisconsin, and Dyson Daniels, who played in the G League. They have similarities to one another. We'll break them all down. We'll go through some of their stats. But on the surface, I really, really like 2 of them. And I'm intrigued by a third, and the 4th, I don't know if I would take really high, but he's flying off draft boards. It's hard for me to figure out. So let's dive right into it. Let's look at some of the stats, comparisons, strengths, weaknesses. Same thing we did for the other video. If you didn't catch that one, go back to it for the top 3 picks. Seemed like you guys liked it. I want to do more of these. We'll do one with bigs, and we'll do one with wings before we get to the draft. And hopefully, as we get much closer, we'll get some gambling on the draft involved. We'll look at the lines, see what we can find. Don't want to force it. Gambling on the draft is tough because you have to figure out what players you like, which is what we're trying to do today, and then also what the teams are going to do, which is the harder thing to predict. But for now, let's just dive in on the guards. So Jaden Ivy is first on my list, and he's the top guard that I like, and he's probably going to go 4th. If we want to just pull up the order here, assuming that the top 3 go where they should, then we have... Don't autoplay on me. Don't you dare do it. We have the Kings 4th, which is really interesting because they have Fox and they traded Halliburton. So they do have room to add another guard to put next to Fox like they were doing with Halliburton. But they already kind of did that last year. And the Kings are in a weird spot. I'm assuming they want to trade that pick. And then the Pistons could probably get another guard to play next to Cade. But who knows if they're ready to give up on their core. We're going to have to find out. So I don't want to worry too much about where these players are going to go for now, because as we get closer down the draft, we did it for the first 3 picks because it makes sense. We know those 3 guys are going to be the 3 guys, and you can mix and match however you want. For the rest, I have this feeling that there's going to be trades, there's going to be movement, and players' stocks rise and fall as the draft gets closer and closer, which is always nonsense, by the way. Never believe in that. As far as I'm concerned, what you thought about the player when the season ended, unless you hear something very specific, that's probably still what I'm going with, unless you've watched film and have kind of dissected something you didn't see before. So getting back to Ivy, he was really, really good, and what I really like is the improvement from freshman year to sophomore year. Purdue was awesome this year. He led the way. That Purdue team, by the way, was... I mean, I had them going a little deeper. They didn't play a lot of defense, which we'll talk about in a second. But he was definitely leading the way on a team that could really score, and they had some good bigs, so they were playing a... You know, not that the NBA uses a lot of bigs these days, but more than some college teams that are running a 6'7" center, you know? So he has some experience playing that kind of pick-and-roll kind of stuff. But before we dive too deep into the stats, on the surface level, I think he's just a hyper athlete. He can handle it. He can shoot. He can attack the rim with reckless abandon. Those are big strengths that can apply to a lot of different guys. I look at him kind of like I want to say a Donovan Mitchell and a Ja Morant kind of thing. That's the popular one being thrown around is Ja Morant. I don't know if anybody is him, but I see some Westbrook here too. But he improved the three-point shot so much that I actually don't know what to do with it anymore, because it was a little bit of a knock on him coming into the year, and then some games it's there, some games it's not. It's very streaky. So if I had to call out a weakness, it's not necessarily the shot itself, it's the streakiness of the shot and whether he can develop that consistency that's necessary at the next level to be either an on-the-ball or off-the-ball guard. I think he can do a little bit of both. Defense is a question mark. He can do some of it. It's kind of like Donovan Mitchell. You're like, is he the good defender that we saw 2 years ago in the playoffs? Or is he the defender that we saw this year that was a turnstile just feeding people to Rudy Gobert and it not working? that's kind of how I feel about Ivy, although he has time to turn it around and he has the size and athleticism and skill to do it. That's where the Westbrook comparison comes in, right? Because he has always had the wiry frame, all the footwork, all the agility to be a good defender, and sometimes it just wasn't there. So that's what I'm concerned about that with Ivy. But I do think there's upside on the defensive side, too. I think this is a really, really good prospect. In other years, he would be higher than a 4th pick. And I think he could outperform some of the top 3, for sure. He's only 20 years old, was born in February, so a young 20. And for a guy that already has 2 years under his belt in college, I think that's really helped him. Good coach there, playing at a big program, playing in big games, proven he can shoot. You know, I'm not necessarily thinking he's going to be this ball-dominant guard that's going to dish out 10 assists, but he is going to be the ball-dominant guard that can score, which is why you get the Donovan Mitchell-type comparisons there. And I think they're reasonable, and he's an all-star. There's nothing not to like about that. So 6'4", 200 pounds, nothing to worry about there. Could probably up it to 210 if he felt like it and be one of those, you know, like a Dwayne Wade size. I don't know if the skill is exactly the same, although there's some traits that are similar. But that size guard, which is exactly what you want. He can be your lead guard, but he's not necessarily a point guard, if that makes sense. So yeah, Mitchell, Morant, Westbrook, Wade, those kind of things. And when you look at the game logs from this year, last year we won't go back to, but especially down the stretch in the NCAA tournament, he came up really small here in this St. Peter's game, which was just a weird game. But even when doing that, still showed the ability to get on the glass, 8 rebounds, which is what I like about him. Athleticism, he's hungry, he has that explosive fire in him. Like, same thing with Westbrook. I keep going back to that, even if it's not a perfect comparison, because when his shot isn't falling, he's still, I know it's trendy to crap on him now, but he still gives you the effort a lot of the time on the glass and with explosive athleticism kind of plays. So while the passing isn't there, that's not really what you're getting this guy for. And the shot wasn't really falling. 1 for 6 from 3 against the St. Peter's team. That's alarming. But you look back at other games, and he was really going for it. So in that Texas game, it was a little interesting because he only went 4 for 7, but ended up with 9 free throws and 18 points. 9 free throws in the game before that against Yale, too, 22 points. 8 free throws before that. I really like that. That's what I like about this guy. He's going to attack, and the three-point shot isn't broken. It's just very streaky. If you look at Ja Morant's stats, I wonder what he shot from 3 this year. I would imagine 34.4, right? But he's streaky, too. He'll go through games where you don't think of him as a dead-eye knockdown shooter, but then all of a sudden you finish with 35% and it's okay. So that's kind of where Ivy is, and if he can improve that, great pick. I really do think, look, I'm pretty low on Chet, and I understand the upside. We went over it in the top 3 picks. He's 3rd on my list, and I really do think I would take Jaden Ivy over Chet unless... Yeah, I was going to say unless you have a glaring weakness in the paint, but I don't really believe in drafting for team need if you're this high. So I think Ivy is a really, really interesting prospect that has so much upside, and absolute worst. Look, the downside is maybe he doesn't defend a lot. Maybe the three-point shot doesn't fall at the next level when you extend the range, and maybe the athleticism goes by the wayside because he's playing too fast for his own good and it's just out of control, and he ends up as, worst case scenario, I would imagine he ends up as a spark plug off the bench, right? But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the upside is Donovan Mitchell, Ja Morant, all-star level, and I think he could get there really quickly because the body type is there and he can learn quick. Look at some of these games. I mean, he didn't have the 30s or anything, and the assists are never really there. Like, don't think that you're getting this guy to be your pick-and-roll facilitator. That's not the point. And I guess if you have heartburn over drafting what you might call a 2-guard, even though everyone's a combo guard kind of at this point, and we'll talk about more players like that, that isn't a dead-eye shooter, then I get that. I do think he's going to play a lot of point. You just have to have another ball-handling guard. He's going to work best with another combo guard. He has to go to the right team. So I think if you have Ivy and Fox and the Kings pick 4th, it is interesting. I think he would be nicer next to Cade. That would be really unbelievable to watch. Imagine that. But again, I don't want to go too much into team fit, so I really like Ivy. I could put him 3rd on my board and bump Chet down to 4th. I know that's not popular, but the rebounding ability, He can play like a wing but a guard. If you like that, you're going to like him. And he really led this Purdue team offensively. And defensively, I don't think it's a lost cause. This team was bad on defense. I get that. But I don't think it was necessarily all him. Steals and blocks numbers aren't really there. But turnovers weren't incredibly high either for a guy with a pretty high usage rate. And so, yeah, I'm in on Ivey for sure. Offensive rating, pretty solid. Man, this Purdue team was good. It's crazy that they lost to St. Peter's, but in any case, I'm looking at Ivey with wide eyes. But this is actually, while I would pick Ivey above Mathurin, Mathurin is my favorite guy to watch. And that Arizona run, that team was awesome all year. And I'm just so super, super intrigued by him. The size, now 6'7" feels really big. I don't know if he was that big. 6'6" on Google. 6'4.5" measured. Yeah, there's some weird stuff going on about his height, but I think it's clouded by the fact that he's very athletic and he has a huge wingspan. I like that. Also, flat out, this guy can shoot the basketball. He is not Jaden Ivy. They are kind of opposite players in some ways. He's going to play with the same pace as Ivy. They can move the basketball up and down. But the size and the length of Mathurin is what I'm really intrigued by, and just the raw shooting ability. From three this year, 37% doesn't tell the whole story. He was 42% the year before, and the usage rate went up a lot, so the three-point percentage went down a little bit. But he can fill it up. And again, another guy that isn't necessarily going to be your passer, right? Mathurin especially, I don't expect to be running any point guard, really. He will be a two-guard. But he can be a combo guy that can handle the ball for you in the half court for sure and push the pace in fast break situations big time. So I love Mathurin. He also has a lot of raw defensive ability from the athleticism and the length that I think is going to shine through. And I could kind of see him turning into like a... I didn't have a good player comparison for him. I loved watching him at Arizona. There is some stuff where you see in the pick and roll with Koloko when they were there that he was able, in those tournament games especially, he was able to find the guy on the lob because his handle's pretty tight and his shot threat allows him to see the court pretty well. So I don't think he's a lost cause passing the basketball. I just, again, like Ivy, I don't expect him to be your pick and roll master and maestro and finding the perfect pocket pass here and there. But that doesn't mean he can't be a threat because you're setting screens for him to shoot. And then if you overplay that, kind of like Steph Curry, right? He's a great passer. I realize that's a ridiculous comparison. But when you trap Curry, he's always finding the pass. And I think Mathurin will be able to do something like that if you're hedging hard on his jumper. But the jumper is really where it is. The weaknesses, I guess, would be just consistency on defense. I don't think he's found it yet. His body is wiry and long, and he has to figure out how to use that to his best capabilities because he's light for his height. Ivy is more stocky. Mathurin is more stretched out a little bit. But he is tough. And then consistent passing, although, again, the highs are high. So I'm not really worried about the passing ability, and I don't think you're asking him to be a point guard per se. The only other thing is turnovers because he plays at a crazy pace. But the turnover numbers were low. When you watch him, sometimes it gets out of control. So I'm happy about the turnover numbers being low. I think part of that was because Arizona was a well-oiled machine offensively, and I wonder how that will look at the next level. But if he can take care of the ball and be shooting, he's going to fill an excellent role right off the bat at the NBA level. So I'm really intrigued to see where he goes. He could be a good pick next to Cade, although I think that's a little early for where people are projecting him to go. But I would have no problem taking him fifth behind Ivy. I really do think that he's going to be a pretty good player either way, depending on how his career goes. You could say the same thing about Jabari Smith, right? Different body type, different player, but both of them are going to be able to come in and shoot the basketball immediately and fill a role on a good team. If you put him on the Celtics bench right now, Mathurin, they would be starving for him to play minutes over Peyton Pritchard, right? I really believe that, like right now. Mathurin is young, turning 20 this month, so he's a little younger than Ivey. A lot of these guys we're going to break down are pretty young. They're all 20, except for Dyson Daniels, 19. But, yeah, so I don't have any heartburn over that. Played in a tough conference in the Pac-12, ran a really good team, handled the ball a ton for them, really high usage rate. Steals were good. He's very active. Again, the defensive consistency, I don't know, on the ball, but either way, he at least has the, again, another weird comparison, the Allen Iverson type, like, okay, is he a bad defender because he leads the league in steals every year kind of thing? That doesn't necessarily make you a good defender, but at least there is that. And I think Mathurin's size and length will, comparing him to AI defensively is very silly, but just on the point of steals, I think he's active and alert. So I do think he can disrupt some plays once we see him at the next level with a bunch of better defenders around him, and he can kind of flex his size a little bit for a 2-guard. Player comparison wise, really tough for me. I had the one that I'm really thinking of is a guy that I thought was always really good, played a really good role on a lot of different teams, including championship teams, and that is J.R. Smith. His IQ was silly at times, and he said weird stuff and always took his shirt off. However, he was always able to shoot the basketball at a high rate. When he got hot, it was a scary thing. He could always push the pace, very athletic, a better defender than anyone ever gave him credit for. So some of that, although with better passing upside and probably better defensive upside. I said the same thing when it comes to Jamal Crawford as a player comparison. Jamal Crawford's handle probably a little tighter, but the same kind of deal. Great shooter, pushing the pace, go, go, go. Worst case scenario, he comes off the bench. He could score 20 for you. Best case scenario, he can do that in addition to being a spot-up shooter next to another guard. And just with the raw upside for defensive and passing ability that he could grow into, I really like Mathurin. And the combination of being able to serve a role on a good team immediately and be able to work on different skills is really important, because you have a guy like Johnny Davis that we'll get to has a lot more to work on with the three-point shot, which we'll talk about in a second. And that is probably always going to be something that he has to deal with. Whereas Mathurin's defensive efficiency and passing ability has at least flashed well. So to me, he's closer to closing that gap than some of these other prospects are. So you can fill a role and improve at the things you have to do at the same time, and it's not this huge undertaking of player development, which is important for me when trying to figure out who you want to draft, especially in the middle of the first round or even towards the top end of the first round. So I really like Mathurin. If we look at his game log, let's see what we can do here. Those games in the tournament are what I really, really loved. This one, especially the TCU game where he scored 30, he had the buzzer beater, played every minute, basically. This game went to overtime. He played more than 40 minutes. He had 8 rebounds in this one, 4 assists, 2 steals, filling it up. Didn't turn it over a ton for a guy that was controlling the ball every single possession. 3 for 11 from 3 is a weird one. Generally, he shot better than that, but he was trying to force it to will his team to win, and they did. This is a guy that has some clutch factor in him. I really like that. And you've seen him do a lot. He had a 29-point game here, 30, 28, 27. He has these explosive games, and he can really drop bombs on you, but he shoots a lot of threes, but they never felt like there were some heat checks for him down the stretch, but even those might go in. It never felt like totally forcing. He felt pretty in control most of the time that I watched him. So another guy that I'm not expecting to get double-digit assists, but super athletic, which I like, will fill up the rebounding totals, will at least compete on defense, and can really score the basketball. So I like Mathurin. If the Knicks are picking, I'm kind of into him next to RJ Barrett. I think that would be a really good combination. I don't think he's going to fall that far, but man, if they could get their hands on him, that would be a pick that I would definitely love, and I'm really intrigued to see where this guy goes. I think there's a lot of upside here that people are missing. Johnny Davis is next. He's 6'5", 6'4", 6'5", roughly. Another guy that's around 200 pounds. He feels a little stronger than Mathurin, probably. Maybe that's only because his defense is so good, which makes this really difficult, right? You look at the stats, he scored 20 a game, which is more than the other two, which is kind of crazy because it doesn't really project that way. 8 rebounds a game, though. This guy is just willing to get in the mix. It's how I play basketball, except I'm 5'10 and not athletic. But I like to play kind of post play for a guard, which is rare overall and always has been rare, but it's more rare now than ever. So my player comparisons for Johnny Davis are kind of tough because not a great three-point shooter. That's the weakness. Definitely it's something to work on. People have done this before. This is a mirage, this 39%. 30% is probably more accurate to where he really is. He didn't play a ton in his first year. All three of these guys, by the way, I really like because they have 2 years of experience. I think that really helps. But the three-point shot is not actually all the way there, and the athleticism is not all the way there. I don't mean to say that he's not agile or quick or anything like that. He has a lot of body control. I suppose that is athleticism as well. However, not going to play above the rim. You're not drafting Johnny Davis for that, despite the fact that he's kind of tall. You're drafting him for mid-range shot making, post play, finishing ability, and defense. He will defend both on and off the ball. And so I have a bunch of player comparisons to varying degrees. The first one I thought of was Chauncey Billups because he can run the team. Billups was a pretty good three-point shooter, I think, but it wasn't always there as far as I remember. Let's look that up to see if I'm just making that up completely. Career, and the game has changed since he's been there. Career, wow, 39% from three. That's crazy to me. I didn't remember him being that good a three-point shooter, but I guess he kind of was. So maybe that's a little bit unfair. I did have some other ones, though, that make a little bit more sense. But the post play is why I first thought of Chauncey, and the defensive ability, the size for a lead guard. Guys that you could just kind of rely on, even if they weren't going to be the volume chucker, right? Even look at his three-point attempts. Very efficient, but never shooting a ton. Maybe that's a little off base. Maybe the better player comparison is probably Drew Holiday is another guy that I had down for this. Because while he's gotten a little bit better, and we saw him try to take over for Middleton in the playoffs this year, that's not really his strength. 36%, again, efficient, but not a volume shooter from there. I could see Davis turning into that. I don't think he's even there right now. I think that number will be a lot lower. But the point remains, he's there for defense. He can facilitate. He can put in time on the rebounds because he's pretty big for a guard compared to a lot of other guys. He's wiry. He's strong. He can really play in the post and get some shots down there that you don't expect. The mid-range is very good. I imagine the field goal percentage will be pretty high for Johnny Davis. Almost 50% here, 47 basically this season. So I think he can score, and it's a kind of a throwback style player. I don't want to give this comparison necessarily, but it makes sense to me when you think of what Luka Doncic did in the playoffs this year. Most of his attacking, he can shoot the three, but he's streaky. It's not his biggest strength. Maybe if we look back on this video in 5 years, we'll say, well, Luka's a great shooter now, and maybe Johnny Davis will be too, but it's that drive into the paint, bump the guy, and get the little fadeaway that you can drill every time because you're getting space and creative and you're getting into the paint and getting the shots that you want down there. That's the part that I can see Johnny Davis being pretty good at. The downside is the athleticism is not actually there to finish at the rim amongst the trees, but you could say that about Luka too, right? He's not a high-flying dunker, and he finds a way to be crafty around the rim and get it done, and that is like insane level for what I expect Johnny Davis to be, but at least some of those traits translate to what I'm seeing Luka do. The only other player comparison I had, this is a weird one, but Anthony Carter. I always liked Anthony Carter. This is probably the lower end of the spectrum, but he was on the Knicks. He was on a lot of different teams, had a pretty good career. I don't know what the stats would look like. And I'm not saying you would draft Anthony Carter at the top of the draft or anything. You're obviously hoping for a little bit better than this, but put in a long career and was always able to facilitate, rebound, score a little bit on the inside. For a guy that like can't score at all, right? Still shot above 40%, which I'm not, ringing out, wow, 40% shooter or anything. But you always knew while watching this guy, and again, this is a really weird comparison, but I always liked the player, that even if he was off the bench, he would come in, he would defend a lead guard and give you a lot of effort. He would get into the teeth of the paint and make something happen. Sometimes he could finish enough there or facilitate there and make it work. Not a great three-point shooter, but always was able to fill a role. So I think Johnny Davis's floor is pretty high, but in today's NBA, if you can't shoot the three at all, your floor is actually just not being in the league. So he's a weird guy to try to evaluate, and I have no idea where he's going to go in this draft. He's going to go in the first round. I could see him getting taken early if someone thinks they can fix the shot because all the other skills are there, and I could see him falling all the way down because all these other guys seem to have better shot-making ability, even some of the wings that we'll talk about in another video. So I like him as a player. I just am unsure where I would take him. Definitely behind Mathurin and behind Ivey for me, because I want shot makers if I can get them. But it's not to say that Johnny Davis isn't bringing a lot to the table. He really is. And if you need a defender, this is the spot where if you're 15th in the draft and he's on the board and you're like, the Lakers aren't necessarily going to pick here, but if you are the Lakers and you need a wing defender and you have enough ball handlers, you just want a guy that can get in there, almost like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope kind of thing, except better scoring ability on the inside and ball handling and stuff like that, but can defend for sure, so he's at least going to fill a role for you. This is the kind of guy where at the top of the draft, like I said, I don't like drafting for need. I want best player available. If you are drafting for need, you can get Johnny Davis and really improve your team quickly. I like the Drew Holiday comparison. I think he can grow into that if things go well. So I am somewhat in on Johnny Davis, but definitely behind a lot of other people just because the upside is asking a lot for him to turn into a really good shooter. Then again, we saw Jason Kidd go through this in a different era for sure, and who knows how he would be now. Probably great because he's a Hall of Famer. But he did eventually develop the shot as he got older, and he had enough skills in him that he could get there. The downside to Davis is that for me, when I want a guy that can play only below the rim and is looking to get into the teeth of the defense and be crafty and stuff like that, like Luka, I want him to be able to pass the basketball really well, and that is not a huge strength of Johnny Davis. So I worry that he could end up a bench player. That doesn't mean he won't be really good, and that doesn't mean that on the right team he couldn't be the second guard where you have a fill-it-up scoring lead guard. Like if you put him next to Dame Lillard or something, maybe that would work. Because he's just filling that role, but I don't expect him to be the all-pro, all-NBA first-team superstar that some of these other guys could blossom into. So that's kind of where I'm at with Johnny Davis. I did really like Wisconsin, and I picked them to go pretty far in the tournament because I thought he could carry them there, and it became really evident that people would just sag off of him on the jump shot. I'm sure he's working on it. He's a young guy. You never know. It's not too late to turn it around. If Andrew Wiggins can turn around his motor, which is the one thing that's really hard to change, what a finals by him, by the way. But yeah, everybody can improve, right? It's not, having a weakness isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when it's the jump shot in the 2022 NBA, it's a little bit scary at least. Last one, Dyson Daniels, and this, talk about tough to evaluate, right? Didn't play in college, came from Australia, young guy, 19, just turned 19, played a season for G League Ignite. And if you're not familiar with what G League Ignite is, and trust me, I had to look it up just to make sure that they didn't play all the other G League team. I was pretty sure. Don't watch a ton of G League, but I did watch a lot of tape on Daniels. They only play in these tournaments that they have with the G League, but not in the regular season standings. And the whole point of the Ignite team is, and I'll pull up the roster here, to combine guys that wanted to forego college, to get them some money, first of all, to play in the G League, get some interesting prospects there to have people's eyeballs on the G League in general, although then I don't understand why they're not playing for the teams, but I guess it would be unfair maybe. And they want to combine this with some veterans to really, this is like a training camp basically for the G League players. It's not as much like two-way contract kind of stuff as the other G League teams are. This is like, spend a year here. We're going to have you improve by playing with other really good players and some veterans. CJ Miles got a game in here. Amir Johnson was on this team. Costa Koufos. They didn't play a ton of games. They kind of mix and match with what veterans they're going to put in there. Pooh Jeter's still playing. Look at that. Scoot Henderson, one of the greatest names that you can possibly have. Marjan Beauchamp. I mean, the best G League Ignite wins the game award, the name game award. But it's hard to evaluate them because they're playing against G League talent. Is that better than college talent? I think probably, because you have some pros mixed in there. And Dyson Daniels played pretty well and did some really interesting things, but the player comparison for him is not even close to what the other three guys are. And I have it down as an Evan Turner type. He's the first guy I really thought of. Maybe a weird comparison. Maybe some DeJounte Murray, but I'm not all the way there yet because I think Murray is much more of an athlete. Turner was a pretty good athlete too. Maybe even later career Celtics kind of Evan Turner, where strengths are defense, IQ, and just kind of running the show of the offense, but not necessarily in a point guard's body. I'm putting him as a guard because that's the way that he plays. Same with Turner. I wouldn't call him a forward, but he has a forward's body. He's 6'6", and will probably fill out a little bit more. He's pretty light, almost like a Josh Giddey body type, you know, which also isn't a terrible comparison, to be honest, because defense is good, IQ is good, running the show, he can pass it, but the shooting just is not there. It's really not there. At least Johnny Davis, I can say that he can shoot in the mid-range really well and crafty finishing kind of stuff. I don't really see that as much from Daniels. And then there's really no explosiveness either. Another below-the-rim player. So we had 2 above-the-rim players and then 2 below-the-rim players for this breakdown. Davis, it's hard, man. I don't know. If you love him, I could see a team reaching for him because he has the experience and can really facilitate and kind of fill up the stat sheet. And Evan Turner went high in the draft. I think people thought he was going to be a little better. And when you're taking a guard like this, or I don't know what you want to call him. I'm calling him a guard. That isn't really interested in scoring the basketball. This is another one that, like, again, I keep saying that Ivey and Mathurin can go at the top of the draft because you think there's a best player available kind of status for them. Davis and Daniels are more of role players for now for me. That doesn't mean they can't grow into something better, but you need Daniels to go to a team with a guy that can really score. Again, if you put Dyson Daniels, I keep saying the Blazers because Dame is there and he kind of needs a partner next to him. If you put him there, it makes some sense because he's going to do the things Dame isn't really going to do that well. He's going to pass it a little bit more when plays break down and you just need pick and roll stuff. I do like that about Daniels. He's going to have high IQ. He's not going to turn it over a ton for a guy that has a pretty good usage rate and the ball is in his hands a lot. 18.2% usage in a G League, which kind of mirrors NBA style. At least it's not so bad. But there's definitely questions. I mean, I don't know if this guy's ever going to be a really good scorer. And so for that reason, I wouldn't take him at the top of the draft. I would take him 4th among these 4 players that I named. That doesn't mean he's going to be bad. It's similar to how I feel about Chet Holmgren. There's just too many question marks for me to buy into this with my draft pick. Now, if we're getting to the 20s and I think that I can have a role-playing guard that can really fit into my rotation, then I'm happy to give Dyson Daniels a look. I just don't know if the upside is all the way there. And I think I was being I like DeJounte Murray, but I think I was being pretty generous because he's a pretty explosive athlete, even after the injuries that he's had. And I don't see that coming from Dyson Daniels personally. So I'm torn. It's harder to evaluate when he's playing only 14 games against weird mixed competition. I do like that he didn't have to go to school, so he's been focused on training full-time, getting paid for it, working with seasoned veterans and coaching staffs and stuff like that can really help. But these are all things that help you become a good role player, basically. And I don't think the upside is there for Dyson Daniels to become an all-star. So if you're taking him in your top 10, I think you're really reaching. But he's a young guy. You never know. He can improve for sure. Shot 56% on 2s. I think he has some of that floater, weird finesse finishing game that's not that bad. But anything beyond that, like even an elbow jumper, and I'm starting to sweat. So, yeah, the perimeter play just isn't really there. And no explosiveness there either. And again, at least if I'm taking Davis, I know what he can give me. They're similar players, kind of. But Davis mid-range takes him above Daniels for me. Neither is super athletic. and Daniels doesn't have the post game that Davis has. So that's how I compare those two. And, you know, it wouldn't be my first pick for sure. But if he's there late and you think you have the right team around him to utilize his skill set while not needing one of your guards, or if you're playing small, put him at the 3 to score the basketball, which is a pretty rare thing, maybe you can get something out of that. I guess you could look at him like yeah, there's not a lot of great comparisons for this kind of guy. So do your best. The Evan Turner one is the one I'm sticking with. And, you know, Evan Turner didn't play that long ago, but even with how much the league has changed since he's been gone, or at least been out of his prime, I don't know if you'd be eager to draft a guy like this. You know, career didn't even get over 30% from 3. This is what I expect of Daniels. That doesn't mean he wasn't a good player. In his prime, I mean, this run with Philly that he had 50 games, he actually scored a bunch, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, was efficient, and no problem with that. But most of his other years, just not a scorer, and you could ask him to do pretty much everything else. But for the second overall pick in that draft, you know, who else was in that draft, by the way? Wall, Favors, Wes Johnson, Cousins you would have taken over him. Not a great draft. I mean, you would have much rather have Hayward, Paul George. Man, I mean, even Bledsoe has a similar kind of trajectory to Turner, right? Doing similar things, not really being able to shoot it that well. So I think we've learned, and I don't think Daniels will go as high, and I think we thought Turner would be a little bit of a different thing, even though he played a decent role for a while. But yeah, with Daniels, too many question marks. Same as Chet. Could be good. Has a lot to work on. Has some skill sets that you can get, but I don't see the all NBA first team upside, and thus I'm not super psyched about picking him early in the draft. That's kind of where I'm at. So those are the 4 players. I hope you got something out of that. The player comparisons are always tough because these guys evolve. But again, Ivy I'm seeing as like a Mitchell, Ja Morant, kind of maybe a little bit of Westbrook kind of thing. Super athletic, handling, attacking the rim. Mathurin has the J.R. Smith factor. Going to shoot the hell out of the ball. Athleticism, pace, raw defensive ability with upside. Maybe not a consistent passer or a consistent defender. And then Davis and Daniels we just went over, playing more inside the three-point line. Struggling with athleticism, but have some defensive abilities that are really, really nice and high IQ players. So we'll see where all these guys fall. We're going to do more of these videos. These are just the guards that I really wanted to point out. It's hard to differentiate between guards and wings sometimes. We will do another video with more wings. I don't know how many players I'll break down in that, probably maybe 4 or 5. And then we'll do bigs, who is always interesting to me, especially in the NBA where bigs seem super important and some of the MVPs of the league are bigs, but yet you hear constantly that bigs aren't as important, and then you see teams going small all the time, so it's weird. Follow at MikeTheMush Sports on Twitter and Instagram for more breakdowns as we get closer, and I'm talking NBA Finals, and we're talking all different sports and stuff. Give that a follow. We're making picks there as well. And give us a subscribe, like the video, leave a comment on what you think on these players or any of the other players you're interested in, who you want your team to draft, all that kind of good stuff. It's good for the channel. It helps. We'll see you next time. I appreciate you listening. Peace out.